Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Table Talk. I'm your host, Jake Combs, and today we are going to be unboxing the new Stormstrike Chariot and the Orruck Warclans Breaka-Boss on Meyer Trogoth. And then we also have the new battletomes. Now, all four of these items are available for purchase as of this coming Saturday. Currently they are available for pre-order. Last I checked, they were still able to be ordered. I don't anticipate, at least the battletomes themselves, running out anytime soon, but I definitely don't think that these are going to be moving as quickly as, like, say, the Dominion box was. But so we'll go ahead and get started now with the Meyer Trogoth. This one is probably by far one of my absolute favorite models that they've come out with for the Cruel Boys. Probably one of the most intimidating Trogoths that I probably have seen them create. And that's going back to, like, when they used to actually be, called trolls. By far much more intimidating than most others that they've come out with. But the river trolls were a little bit more, not so much intimidating, but kind of more up there with the creepy factor. It's kind of gross, but not something that would necessarily strike fear when fighting a seasoned army. But obviously, like, your normal civilians are definitely going to find these terrifying, regardless of which version of troll or Trogoth they're coming against. And then, as far as I'm aware, I know I've never seen a Stormcast Chariot before. And chariots have always been one of my favorite things in the Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar games as far as aesthetics. Just something about them just screams a must-have for any armies where it's available. For example, my Slaves to Darkness army that I keep getting distracted and never build it has currently 5 chariots. My original plan was 3, and ended up getting a really good deal on one of the Shattered Domains, Shattered Dominion, something like that. 3-pack of chariots for Slaves to Darkness. And so originally intended to go with 3, and those 3 I'm slowly piecing together the stuff I needed to make them Warcry warband themed. So each one is going to be themed after a different warband. And then I have 2 others that I haven't decided what I'm going to do with them yet. Now, the moment that they actually announced the Stormstrike Chariot, I hoped that we would be able to get one, and reach out to my contacts at Games Workshop, ask to see if it would be something that we could possibly get a hold of, and we were lucky enough to be one of the ones selected to receive them. So I'm very excited. Now, if you couldn't tell, based on what I've said already and the fact that we have these before release this coming Saturday, all 4 of these items are provided courtesy of Games Workshop for the purpose of this video and talking about each of them and sharing our opinions. But as always, just because they supplied the product does not guarantee a specific opinion one way or the other. But if anyone's watched the show before, you're probably quite aware that I am a huge fanboy of Games Workshop, and for the most part, when it comes to models, which is the bigger part of the hobby for me, is the painting and the building more than the playing. For the most part, Games Workshop can do no wrong. But I like to look at not just the details and what comes in the box, but I try to also focus on what I might do with it, what other people might do with it, in order to make it more unique. Because obviously, in the case of my Slaves of Darkness army, you don't want 5 chariots that look exactly the same. It would just be unlikely that all of your chariots are going to look exactly the same and have the exact same guy in them in a realistic setting. And so, I like to, make each of mine individual. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive right in. We're going to go ahead and open up honestly the one I'm actually more excited for, which, you just listened to me talk about chariots for a good couple minutes, and the fact that the Trogoth is the one that I'm more interested should tell you something about how awesome this model looks. I've seen some of the production photos before, and high definition, zoomed in, took a good look at it, all the different angles that they've shared, and it's an absolutely fantastic looking model. Honestly, I think that for the Cruel Boys, this model far outweighs any that came in the Dominion box for the Cruel Boys. Now, that being said, Indastra is by far one of my absolute favorite models that have come out for the Stormcast side, and I love her just about as much as I love this model right here. So we're going to go ahead and open it up. Now, as always, I like to use my knife, and if you are going to be using a knife or something sharp and you're underage, make sure you get a parent's permission. If you are not, just make sure that you cut away from yourself and you're careful with that knife, because you do not want to cut into your hand. I've seen too many people accidentally carve a nice little chunk out of their hand because they were being careless, which is kind of funny, because you would think that people in the hobby that are doing it more often than not, as far as working with the different materials, would develop more of a more caution for those types of movements. And I've honestly seen more injured hobbyists than I've seen in any other setting where someone might be using a knife. I've worked in a lot of kitchens, and in all the times in the kitchens with all the sharp utensils and everything, again, the more common injuries are the people that I've seen that are hobbyists being careless and basically being in a hurry, wanting to get things over with as quickly as possible. So again, exercise a lot of caution if you're going to be using sharp instruments. So we have 2 sprues total. We're not going to look at them just yet. We have our 1 base. I never remember the diameter. Now, what I do like is on the back side, I've never noticed this before. This might be something new, or this might be something that they've been doing for a while and I've just never noticed. But it actually gives 2 item numbers for this size base. One is without the holes, which this one has 3 holes in it, and then the number with the holes. So if you're looking for a specific one, you can use that item number to make it easier and make sure that you are in fact getting the right one. Especially if you're going to be buying it from other players that have extra bases that they're not using. Now, with actually, before we go into that, one thing I want to mention is with the packaging. I love the new style package that they're doing. Matches with the Dominion box set. To me, it just stands out so much more than the previous Age of Sigmar boxes, which were more of just black and white as far as the main colors and then the picture of the models. It just didn't catch the eye as well as this bright red, and then this high def picture next to it with some background, some terrain and stuff. So they've definitely done a lot better job as far as their packaging goes. Now I do know that pretty much the entire UK has been having a lot of issues with securing cardboard of different shapes and sizes since COVID. So the fact that they are able to still produce these packages like this is a testament to how important it is for them to do it right. Where I know with the 2 endless spell boxes that we received a couple months ago, those ones, from what I understand, were supposed to be in this kind of packaging as well. The ones we received were just the generic white box with a couple different logos on it and a sticker that said what was inside. No pictures or anything. So I definitely look forward to seeing more of these boxes. I'm wondering if the items that are going to be repackaged with updated rules and instructions, if those are going to be seeing more of the white packaging and less of this style, or if they're going to be all converted to this once they get a line on more consistent supplies maybe. Right now it's too soon to tell. I need to spend more time at the shop and see some of the more recent releases and how they're packaging them as far as the re-releases, and see how that compares. Now, one thing I really like about this Dominion release, with the previous edition release that they did for Age of Sigmar, I can't remember the name of the box that it was just so much undead that came out at that same time that it seemed kind of overwhelming and just seemed very unbalanced. Now, with us having a brand new army altogether, we're seeing a lot more of that army come out, but they're doing it in a much slower fashion and spacing them out a bit more, and so it definitely doesn't feel like we're getting a huge influx of options yet, and it definitely feels a bit more balanced. So it's giving people time to start with the items that they already have, build them, get them ready, and then the next thing comes in and they continue. My suspicion is that's more to do with supplies than their actual desire with the release, but I'm just completely speculating here. I have no idea. They keep that information very close to the chest, so all we can really do is just take wild guesses and speculate. So now, as far as the assembly guide, again, we have the very detailed assembly instructions, and where they color parts of it to show you exactly how to turn it, how it's supposed to connect, and also highlight the last piece that was connected, so that way you basically see how everything connects together much easier. Where if you just had, like with this first box where everything's all the same color, if every page is like that, like some of the older instruction books, it's harder to pick out like where the last piece was that you put on in some cases. So doing this, it definitely makes that stand out a lot more. Now for the Trogoth, we do have 2 alternative heads, which is something I didn't actually notice in the pictures before, because every picture that I noticed had the same head. Now let's take a look at the box. Okay, so if you actually look closely on the box, you do see the alternate head there and the main head that they show everywhere there. It just looks like the straps that are going across the Trogoth's nose, even though they look like they're going to be supporting the rider more by having it there, with the color choices that they did, it kind of gets lost in some of the details, so it's very easy to overlook. And then as far as the instruction goes, we've got really 5 full pages. The 6th page is just the final, showing you everything assembled, and then some pictures. And then on the back we have our rules. And one thing I really like is that they've drastically simplified the way that they do the battle sheets, because like normally they would do an entire page for each language, and here they just do symbols, and then in the different languages they tell you exactly what each symbol means. So it definitely makes reading this much easier. And if there's an item that they don't have access to at all, like for instance, if they don't have a missile weapon, in our grid right here, where normally that would have a spot and it would basically be blank underneath it, it's gone. So you only have things that are actually pertinent to the model itself, not everything. So now we're looking at the sprues. With the Trogoth, we have a ton of detail on the fabric that he's wearing, and the muscle. You see a lot of cracks and scales. Even the wood that's used to support the cruel boy that's riding him, you see individual lines in the wood, and the team just does a fantastic job when it comes to like modeling things like chain and scars on the backs of some of the cruel boys, and some of the lines in the wood and things like that. The attention to detail that these guys do is just absolutely amazing. Get you a little bit closer look, and since I'm on this side of the camera, I can't tell if it's doing it in focus at all or not. So if it's not, I do apologize. And then we have our smaller sprue, which is this is going to be the feet, the kind of stomach plate, which is done in a very similar fashion to the shields that the cruel boys use, kind of tie him into the overall aesthetic of the army. And I mean, I just absolutely love this model. It's so much detail, and personally I do prefer the alternate head that you don't see in the pictures very often, with the band going across the nose for support. But we just need to make sure that those bands are done in a more contrasting color, so it stands out more, kind of like the red of the stomach plate compared to the blues and the greens and the whites of the Trogoth. Now, for those that are unaware, they've come out with a new Age of Sigmar app. I believe today, well, technically yesterday, was the release of the beta. And with that, anyone that has one of the new battletomes will be able to input the code that's in there and have full access to the battletome through the app as well. So definitely worth getting. And my understanding is that the app is going to be free, as long as you use codes to bring in the books that you have, and makes me actually want to go check the Dominion rulebook and see if there's any code there that would give you the full rulebook once it's out of beta, because the way it's been described to me is it sounds like that the main rules for the game as a whole are available for free in beta, but are not going to stay that way. So just something to consider, and definitely check out. Now for the Stormstrike Chariot, we have 2 sprues as well, but it's 2 of the bigger ones. We have our big, slightly oval base for it, and then this one also has the holes. And this one, though, does not give you a part number for the same base without the holes. And typically, I usually fill in the holes, kind of make it into like a rocks kind of sitting there, and secure the model in a different fashion, so that way you don't just have this like odd post that is kind of messing up the overall look of the terrain. Now, with the instruction booklet for the assembly, we're looking at 5.5 pages. The last page being actually showing you the last step, and then showing you the final piece. Now, there is some alternate versions that you can do, which we saw in the picture. So right here, it shows one of the Stormcast with a bow and arrow, and then on the back side of the box, we actually see him with a spear. Personally, I like the look of the spear better, so that's definitely how I'm going to be doing this one. And I'm curious if the other Stormcast has maybe an alternate weapon as well. But one thing I do like is, again, the attention to detail is amazing with these guys, because if you're using the bow and arrow, you actually have a slot that the quiver is going to be mounted, so that way they can pull the arrows more efficiently instead of like trying to draw them from their back. So it's definitely going to make things much faster. Now, with the steps in this one, there's a lot more smaller pieces, and so you're definitely going to want to be careful when you're trimming those parts, filling in gaps, things like that, which you might need to do on the Trogoth as well, especially since once they're bigger, some of the gaps are much more apparent when they happen, where the smaller ones, it can kind of get lost in the detail because it's already pretty small. So just something to watch out for. Now, looking at the second Stormcast that's on the Chariot, there is not an alternate weapon that comes with it. But one thing I think is actually awesome that I did not expect is, with these instructions, it actually is recommending that, like, once you finish building, the Griffhound, or the Griff Charger, I think it is, that it's showing you that it's time to paint that one. So before you actually secure them to the Chariot, it's recommended to have them painted. So it's going to give you a much better looking Chariot, because with the placement of the Griff Chargers, it's going to be definitely very difficult to get between them to paint them, and it's going to be very obvious if you miss something there, because you can still see almost the entirety of the Griff Chargers. And the same with the Stormcast that are riding the Chariot. So kudos there for putting in those suggestions. There's a lot of models that Games Workshop and other companies have put out that could have benefited from a guide like this, because there are so many details that can be seen that you can't necessarily reach with a brush at the right angle in order to properly paint it the way that you want to. a prime example is the new Abaddon the Despoiler. You can see the backs of his legs, but if you don't paint them before you put the cape on there, most of the legs, at least on the backside, you're not going to get and have a clean paint job. So if the rulebook had, or the assembly guide had suggested, stopping there and then painting, I might have done that, where instead I put the entire thing together and then painted the entire thing, and we ended up missing some of those spots. But thankfully, with the placement of the cape, it made it much more difficult for people to see some of those. But if you turn it at the right angle, and tilt it the right way, and the light hits it just right, you can still see that it's missing some paint in some spots. So, again, kudos for including those types of instructions in here, so that way, you'll have a much better looking model when you're done. And so definitely like that part a lot. But also at the same time, depending on your skill level and the level of detail you want to do, you might be able to just get away with doing the full assembly and then painting, because most of it can still be reached. You just might not be able to get the edge highlights or some of the dry brushing the way you'd want to for the ones in between. Now the Stormcast themselves, there is more than enough room, it looks like, that if you have them both mounted or just one mounted, you should be able to get pretty much every angle without much difficulty. So it's going to be mostly the griff chargers that you're going to want to do separately. Obviously, to get the best paint job, you're going to want to do each section that they suggest separately, but that's up to you or whoever's painting it. Now, with the two sprues, one thing I immediately notice is the lack of detail on most of the pieces. Now, looking at the image, it makes sense, because most of the body is very flat as far as the fur on the griff hounds or griff chargers, and only the real detail is with the mounting harness and the eagle head, and obviously the tail itself. And so the rest of it is very smooth, and so that's what we're seeing here. And then with the chariot, most of it is just very smooth as well, because it's not a ramshackle chariot put together by a bunch of brutes. It's fine craftsmanship, and so with it you're gonna have something that looks very sleek, very nice. And so the lack of detail it still kind of falls in with the attention to detail, because going with the lore, going with where these are coming from, it makes perfect sense that they would be this way. And the armor is very smooth, very clean, and that just kind of goes with the reforging itself. And so when they're reforged, and basically like they have a brand new set of armor, they're essentially reborn entirely. Now the parts that you would expect to see some detail, obviously the griff charger head, the wheels themselves definitely have some decorative stuff on there. Excuse me. Some of the, looks like, actually no, that's more of the heads, about the neck area. Now with some of the helmets, we have a nice kind of plume on top, for the one that is holding the bow or the spear, and then the other one has a kind of a long high ponytail coming out of the top of his head, as part of the helmet as well. So where you would expect to see the detail, there is plenty of it, But again, it just goes back to that attention to detail where these guys just absolutely excel. And one thing that, you know, I found surprising with Dominion is prior to Dominion, I never really took the time to learn much about the Stormcast. And, you know, with Dominion, I did a lot more reading of the lore, and as I got to understand what the Stormcast were really about and some of their base lore, they definitely seem less like the stereotypical, you know, Sigmar Space Marine kind of attitude that most people take towards them. And, you know, again, in full honesty, I was one of them as well, because, you know, looking at them, they do look like, you know, kind of the fantasy version of Space Marines. And it just kind of felt like, you know, Games Workshop was just more or less trying to create Space Marines for, you know, Age of Sigmar. And I mean, that very well may have been kind of like how the discussion started, you know, because that's what some people wanted. And I do remember discussions back in the fantasy days where some people in the shop that I went to, you know, were essentially asking if they would ever create a Space Marine type army for fantasy. And, you know, there are people in some of the groups, like some of the Warcry groups that I'm in on Facebook, that have actually created rules for Space Marines for Warcry, kind of make them a competitive unit, you know, more for their enjoyment than anything else. But, you know, so there is obviously, or has at least been, a demand for that type of thing. And so, you know, Stormcast Eternals visually fill that ask, but their lore is so much more than just, you know, Space Marines in Age of Sigmar. You know, the act of the reforging of not just the armor, but the person and their soul. You know, in a lightning bolt that comes down and can completely just decimate the troops fighting them when Sigmar is basically calling them back to him on their death. They are just so much more badass than I honestly ever expected them to be. And, you know, as I learned more, I also was getting really heavy into the Xbox video games, Stormground, which honestly is very awesome. It's a lot of fun. You know, you kind of do some tabletop kind of movements. You have to deal with terrain, and, you know, you have negative effects to that. And then you also have like items that, you know, will enhance certain abilities. And, you know, you're definitely moving about the map with some strategy as you're playing. You know, you can't just, you know, charge right in and then hope it all goes well, like, you know, a bunch of Khorne berserkers or something. It's just not going to work. And playing that, you know, there is a Stormcast storyline, there's a Nighthaunt storyline, and a Gloomspite storyline. And so as you play them, you get to learn more about that faction and, you know, what they're about. And so, you know, definitely gave me a bigger appreciation for the Stormcast. Now, with Dominion, it was the first time I have ever really wanted to play a Stormcast army. It is also the only time I've ever wanted to play a greenskin type army. You know, obviously the Cruel Boys are a different type of greenskin, one that, you know, the realms haven't seen really in quite some time. I suspect that, you know, they were inspired by the hobgoblins of the old Warhammer Fantasy Battles days, that kind of faded out on in the end. But bringing them in to Age of Sigmar, it gives a totally different style of play, a totally different look, because as I've mentioned before, I've never really been a big fan of the big brute orcs for the most part. Some of them look awesome and are worth having just for the model alone. But most orcs are just these big, muscle kind of meatheads that you'd expect to play football more than anything else. And with these ones, they're a lot more cunning, a lot more lean, kind of like what you would picture with more of a like a track and field Olympian than you would with someone that just focuses on weightlifting all the time and getting as big as possible. Now, with the book, I've had some of the previous versions, battletomes. I have a couple of them already, and with those, in comparison, the feel, there's a significant weight to these books. The Stormcast Eternal one is much heavier by weight. The hardcover itself feels, I don't know if it's thicker for the cover than what we normally see, but it just feels and looks more durable. And so, durability, things that look good on a shelf, definitely are something that I take notice, because I like to have all of my army books on the bookshelf, so that way I can pull them whenever needed, instead of having to dig around in my closet where all the models I haven't painted yet are, where things get lost. And so having something that really pops like this, with the bright red and the bright white writing, really makes them pop, and I really like that. Now, as with any battle tome, the first section, usually a good few dozen pages, is going to be all lore. And then it looks like that ends about page 74, where we go into examples of some of the different unit types, and paint schemes and things like that. And then also in here we have pictures of the two new big dragons. Can't wait to read more about them, as well as the more dragon troops. And one thing I never saw before is any alternate paint schemes, where before the images that I saw were only of these two up here, but these ones kind of look like some albino type dragons, very white scales, almost looks more zombie dragon like than Knight Draconis. And then of course we have the Star Drake as before, and the Dracoths, and the Hammer and Vandus Hammerhand. Those still remain, and look absolutely badass as well. But they've been around, so there's no surprises there. And then we go into, by page 94, we go into a painting guide, which will help walk people through, how to do Hammers of Sigmar blue armor with certain details, weapon effects, fur cloaks, how to do them differently so that way they get certain effects. Like if you wanted to have the fur be striped, like some animals, or kind of more of a brown or black fur, or even cream, it actually gives you steps on how to paint those. And then the Draconiths, it actually gives steps for how to paint the wing membranes, the underbelly of the dragons, the scales, and how to do different patterns as well. It's a lot more in depth than I would have expected with a lot of this. And then several color options as well, step by step. And then we go into the army rules themselves by page 106. We have spell lores, we have enhancements, storm hosts. Then we go into the path to glory. Which is a type of campaign that you can run. And then, the fact that they do the entire thing in full color like this is, a testament to the quality that they, put forth in pretty much everything that they do. Where, most companies, this picture of the models, as an example of, someone playing, they're going to do that in full color, but most of them don't do these kind of battle map layouts the same way with, usually it's more black and white, but this, having that distinct contrast between the different colors to identify, where your territory is and where the invaders are for that scenario. And then we have our War Scroll battalions, Warrior Chamber, Harbinger Chamber, Exemplar Chamber, Vanguard, Auxiliary Chamber, Extremis, Sacrosanct. So there's actually a lot more chambers than I thought there were. And it looks like the new ones are the Exemplar Chamber. And I actually had no idea that there were that many. I honestly thought there was 3 and now 4, but it looked like there was at least 5 or 6. So more options than I've actually heard of as far as the different chambers go. And then, right here we have the rules for the 2 different big dragons that they recently announced. And one thing I really like that is newer, I don't believe the last edition did this, but the fact that pretty much every model has an image of that model with the name of it, so that way if you're going by look because you don't remember the name, you can identify, oh, it's this model, and then go from there. And then that goes on for pretty much the rest of the book. We do have some pitched battle profiles, army rules section, which is basically 2 pages. As well as a list of allies that can be taken. So very cool stuff. And then, as to be expected, there is a code, so that way you can actually have this added to the new app. And then obviously the Orruck Warclans one. My understanding, without getting into this yet, is that with the Orruck Warclans one, it's meant to combine all of the greenskin battletomes into one battletome, so that way you have one, then you kind of have them all. But I would expect that like the Ogor Maw tribes would not be included in this, even though they're part of the same Grand Alliance. Because if they were, then this one would have to have like Cities of Sigmar, Daughters of Cain as well, and it's not going to because they're their own separate factions. Now, just going through and getting past all of the lore. So getting to page 60, so about 40 pages difference between the two books before it actually starts getting into images of the different models that are available. Like right here we have Swamp Boss Scumdrack, or is it Scumdrack? Yeah, Scumdrack. Which, from what we've been told, we're actually going to be receiving that to unbox with you guys. Should be doing that next week, unless there's some delays. And then, as we're flipping through, I see Gordrak, the Fist of Gork, his Mega Boss, the War Chanter, and then we have some of the Savage Orcs as well. And it actually even shows the 4 Savage Orcs that are from Warhammer Underworlds. And then we go into a similar painting guide. And then our army rules. Oh man, excuse me. And then our Path to Glory again. So with the way that this is laid out, it's going to be pretty consistent between the different factions as far as how it's laid out, but obviously the rules are going to be vastly different. And then we have a matched play section, which I don't remember seeing one for the Stormcast book, but I would be surprised if there wasn't. And then we go into our War Scrolls, starting with Kragnos, which is one of the gods of destruction, and basically when he was freed, that's when the Cruel Boys were freed as well. My understanding is that they were essentially trapped inside a mountain, and some of the recent fighting kind of tore open that mountain and released them. And then with this one, the pitched battle profile is only a single page. And then, of course, we have the code in the back as well. So definitely some very cool stuff. Really looking forward to getting in and being able to read these and start using them with the 2 new factions. I'm really looking forward to getting the Breaka-Boss and the Trogoth painted, as well as the Stormstrike Chariot. The speed and the hitting power of a chariot is definitely something that is, I would say, a little underappreciated. I mean, they've got maneuverability, they've got range, speed, and they use it to their advantage quite effectively. Obviously, depending on the player and how they move them, but in the history of battle and stuff, the chariots were devastating in some fights. So definitely looking forward to those. Now my biggest problem is figuring out the color scheme for all of my Stormcasts, because I'd want them all to be a matching overall theme. Now with the ones that are like, say, the different chambers, maybe do each chamber a different color, because I actually have most of the chambers I have models that I have, so that might be a good way of differentiating them between the different chambers, so that way there will be less confusion. Something to keep in mind. But that's it for tonight. Thank you guys for watching as always, and next week we will have some more unboxings. If we don't receive the expected box from Games Workshop, we do actually have some other stuff that we'll be unboxing then. That depending on how much we have to unbox, that we have yet to receive, we will probably be doing some of the Barnes & Noble exclusive unboxings. So again, something to look forward to for next week. And again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you all next week. Good night.